So I'm a programs coordinator at Columbia University. I work on the Justice and Education Initiative. It's a program that increases access for formerly incarcerated people and people who are currently incarcerated, increases access to higher education. So one of the programs we run sends Columbia faculty into the prisons, in New York prisons, Sing Sing, Taconic, and Bedford Hills, and also the federal facility in Brooklyn, and they get Columbia credits there. We also have a program on Rikers Island, the Rikers Island educational program that provides module courses because the people who are on Rikers Island are it's a very transient population. So people are there one day and gone the next. So some people stay there a few months, a year, few years. So they send 6 to 8 week educational modules. Like the first module that they sent in there was the graphic design program, and it's a program that they allow iPads into the facility, and our facilitators would teach them how to make posters and flyers, and we would have like a social justice theme so they can look and think about things that were going on in society, and they would learn the hard skills on how to make posters and do graphic design. So they had those programs. And then there's the program that I run, is the Justice and Education Scholars Program, a program for formerly incarcerated people to take classes on Columbia campus with the normal, traditional college students.
And these courses can be applied to a degree?
Yes. So the Columbia courses, they're the same courses that all the matriculated undergraduates take, so they can be transferred from to any other institution of higher learning. So most people who take who participate in the program, they utilize the program in one of two ways. They either use the credits that they take at Columbia, because they initially take two courses. One course is a academic writing course that help you develop your academic writing. Then they take a literature's humanities course, the humanities text critical skills course. And if they do well in both of those courses, we sponsor them to take one course per semester indefinitely, kind of, or until you get your bachelor's degree. So what people do is either they'll apply to a school anywhere like a SUNY or a CUNY, and they'll continue to take classes at Columbia and use them to transfer to augment their transcript at another institution, and graduate from that other institution with the credits from Columbia. Or they'll take the courses there. Usually they'll take 2 or 3 extra courses outside of the initial courses, and then they'll apply to the School of General Studies. And in the last, let's see, we've been around for about 4 or 5 years, and we had like 5 students apply to the School of General Studies. 3 of them got in. 1 graduated already, and 1 is on his way to graduate. And then I think we have another student who applied and will start this fall. And then we also have other students who are in the program but graduated from other universities, John Jay, Hostos with their associate degree, and things of this nature. So this is how to utilize the program that I run.
Richard, tell us about your own educational background. You had graduated from high school when you were arrested, right?
No, I hadn't graduated from high school when I was arrested. I graduated, I got my GED inside of prison, and upon my release, the director of the film, his wife is Claudia Rankin. She was working at the time at Pomona College, and it's part of the Claremont Consortium of colleges. 5 colleges, undergraduate colleges that share resources in that area. And Pitzer College was the one that I attended. They had a new resources program for non-traditional students over the age of 24. And she informed me about the program, and I applied and got in, and I moved out there in 2012 and graduated in 2014 with a BA in sociology.
What happened to the other kids? Were there 4 boys originally, or just 3 of you?
It's 4 of us.
Okay, so how come we only just see those 3? 3
One's
is
still in jail.
1 is still
That's
incarcerated.
Donavon?
No, Frankie.
Oh,
Yeah, Frankie. So Frankie, he was considered like the ringleader of the.
the one who gave the judge all the lip?
Right. So he's still he was involved in more robberies than everyone else. He was almost in every count. And so one of the things that's keeping him confined long in Ohio, the mandatory, he has mandatory assistance for every time there was a firearm used in the commission of a robbery. So he had 9 of them, and they're 3 years mandatory that have to be done individually. So 3 times 9 is 27. So he had to do 27 years before he even started his sentence of 200 and something to 500 and something. His parole board he's eligible for parole in 2035. He applied for clemency in 2014, maybe 15. The governor at the time denied him, said he didn't do enough time. And you can apply for clemency in Ohio every 2 years. So 2 years later, he applied again and was met with the same result. And I think he's on his 29th year of incarceration for a crime where no one was actually hurt.
What's he do? How is he doing? Are you in touch with him?
Yeah, we're in touch. I'm no longer on parole, so we can have communication, and I speak with him probably once every other week. His family is in Ohio. I go back and forth. My children are in Ohio, so I go back and forth to Ohio, and I see his family and everything. But he's keeping his head strong. Right now, they're working on trying to get him out via the court that sentenced him. There were some new laws passed where after he's done with his mandatory time, which I think was up last year, or the year before last, that he's eligible for a type of probation. So we're working on trying to get him out through that means. But yeah, he's still incarcerated. Donavon, the bald head one with the green eyes, he's the director of I think it's the Summit County Reentry Network. So he works similarly to what I do, but in Ohio. But he works with people who are coming home, and he helps them to get together their reintegration plans and returning citizens and things like that. And Charlie, he's married and a barber. He got his barber's I don't know if you got to that point in the film where, no. Okay, so Charlie, he came out, Donovan went home first, and then I came home, and then Charlie came home 6 months after me in 2010. So Charlie went to barber college, and I went to college in California. He completed barber college and got his barber's license, and he's a licensed barber living, I think, in Maryland now with his wife.
And what did you have? How long were you on parole?
I was on parole for 13 months.
All right, my name's Clyde Griffin. I also come from Ohio.
Oh.
From Columbus. And just looking at the film, the family seems fairly stable.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about your experience of the choices you made at that time, do you think it was just the peer pressure? What do you think was motivating you? And secondly, what kind of intervention do you think could have stopped it? There's 2 questions there.
Yeah. The motivation, was it peer pressure? For me, my personal experience, I don't think it was peer pressure in terms of let's do it, let's do this and do that. Because I was already selling drugs. Like I said, I was already headed for prison. It was just a matter of what I was going to get caught for, whether it's selling drugs or getting in a fight, because I had this mentality where contrary to popular belief, young black and brown children can feel their marginalization. They know when mainstream society has pushed them to the edges of society and don't seem to care about them. I felt this way in school. Did you notice in the film that I learned to walk, and I could walk and talk at 6 months?
Yeah.
My mother lied about how old, yes. Yeah. So my mother lied about my age, and I started kindergarten at 3. Yeah. So somewhere.
I didn't know.
Yeah, so somewhere in the educational system, my ability fell through the cracks, and they were never capitalized on. But my experience in school was everything in the educational system did not reflect who I was or my lived reality. At the time, I wasn't able to process it and think of it in terms, but I learned that later on in college. But I didn't like school, although learning came easy to me. So what appealed to me was things in my neighborhood and the things that the people in my neighborhood they were doing that looked like me.
And so you were younger. You were like 2 years younger than the kids in your class, right? All
Yeah.
Going through?
Yeah, no. In order for me to catch up, my mother asked the school to hold me back. She told me that she didn't think I was doing well enough to go forward. So she did that twice, in kindergarten, then again in the first grade. I remember they ended up finding out my age because she told my birthday was in September or something, and like back then they was, if your birthday, they would announce it in class.
Yeah.
And the teacher was like, hey, somebody had a birthday today, but they forgot. And I'm looking around like, who they forgot their birthday? And so she's like, hey, Richard, you forgot your birthday? I'm like, no, I didn't. My birthday's in November. And we ended up in the principal's office. They called my mom, and I ended up ratting on my mom unconsciously. But yeah, I started school with it at that age. So to answer that part of your question was, it was more of a social thing with me and not feeling accepted by mainstream society that influenced my decisions a lot more than I would say peer pressure. Like the aptitude was there, but there was nothing in this that interests me. And I won an actual math contest where we sat with the buzzer. I won an oratorical contest where I wrote a speech and won it school wide. Like all these things were happening, but I don't know what happened where all this, this talent was left uncultivated. And I'm not just going to blame the school system. My parents were part of the problem. They didn't push me enough either, too. But yeah, so it wasn't so much peer pressure that led me into that life.
I think you told us that Akron had integrated schools at the time they
Mhm.
were in school here, so you were not in a segregated
No,
school.
no. This is the mid '80s.
So you think that an intervention for the school system
Oh,
would have helped?
In terms of what type of intervention would have helped, it depends on when did it happen, and that's what I meant by the school failed to cultivate the talent. So we send children to school, and there's a set curriculum already there for all of the students throughout there. But people learn at different ways, and they learn at different levels, and it's all different for people. And I think what schools need to do is to be seeking those talents that people have and cultivating those talents instead of a cookie cutter education. So if the education that I received at an early age would have been curtailed to cater towards my abilities, which were clearly shown at the time, then the results may be different.
Well, what specifically do you think they could have done?
Mathematically, I think there should have been. I should have been pushed more into mathematics, or even like my abilities to write, maybe even arts. There's someone should have caught that, whether either my parents or the educational system. So I think like socially, there was a failing there socially somewhere in one of those institutions, either the institution of the family or our educational system.
I mean, I'm sorry, I'm hopping it all, but I'm just like, specifically, they would have challenged you more,
Yeah,
or given
yeah.
you more challenge, because you
not just challenge,
you got recognition.
not so much challenging, not just challenging, but a curriculum that reflected my lived reality. All the teachers in my school were white, so I couldn't relate to them. All the subjects in my books were white, so I could not relate to them. The only time we learned about our history was in the month of February, and that we watched Eyes on the Pride and Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
So there's a rich history of African American contributions to the world. I mean, of African diasporic contributions to the world and America specifically that's not taught in school. So like I was talking with the brother Prince back there, and he's in a partnership with Harry Belafonte. The first time I heard about Harry Belafonte's actions as an activist in America here was when I met him outside of school 20 years later. Like his history should have been taught in the schools, and his impact he had on the entertainment industry and all those things. If seeing him, and what he was able to accomplish would have made a big difference for young black and brown students.
How many black kids were there in your class?
I can't remember way back then, but there was a significant number.
Like half, maybe?
Yeah. So I went to schools in Ohio and schools in Boston. I'm originally from Boston, Massachusetts, a small town outside of Boston, Fitchburg. But my high school years, I was in Boston. I went to Charlestown High, which was, we were bused out there. So this was during the busing time. So we were in Charlestown, we were the minority students there. It wasn't even half of us. We probably made a third, if that, of the high school population.
Yeah. How long were you in?
I did 19 and a half years.
And so what was most helpful and most difficult for you when you first got out?
I think the most helpful thing when I got out, I would say was the halfway house, like I was talking to Prince about. Although a lot of the rules were very restrictive and counterproductive, but it was like a transition. I think I would have been really, really lost had because you have to think, I went in when I was 18, I was locked up. It was like a few, maybe 6 months before my 19th birthday, and I got out when I was 38. So the halfway house was like a transitioning phase where I still had some type of supervision that kept me from a lot of the things that was happening in my neighborhood, because I went outside of my neighborhood. I went to one city over, and my neighborhood hadn't changed.
Were you in Massachusetts or?
This is Ohio. So one of the things, so my original talk was about the model minority and reentry. And doing this talk and traveling throughout the country, screening the film, and me graduating from college and coming to Columbia, and one of the things that happens is people were like, hey, you're very inspirational, you give us hope and stuff like that. And do we all understand the model minority concept? It's a sociological concept. Okay, so let me read it exactly, because I don't want to say it wrong. I like how it was put. Okay, a model minority is a demographic group, whether based on ethnicity, race, or religion, whose members are perceived to achieve a higher degree of social economic success than the population's average. This success is typically measured relatively by income, education, low criminality, and high family marital stability. So one of the most stereotypical model minority we have in society is the Asians who come to America, and they seem to achieve a lot more than the average population, and they utilize the Asians as a reason to justify why African Americans don't achieve, because they're saying that they don't take advantage of the opportunities that Americans have. So similarly, they utilize people such as myself who come home from prison and do succeed. But first and foremost, like the definition of recidivism is kind of controversial. What is, yes, like at what point do you say, okay, he successfully really made it back into society? Because statistically, 83% of people who are released from prison are rearrested within 9 years. So that's a very high rate. 83% will be rearrested, but that doesn't necessarily, so the notion of like what is recidivism is it's not defined. So that's just being arrested, but that don't mean they've been convicted and sent back to prison. But this is how they determine what recidivism is and recidivism rates, by these statistical numbers, right? And policies and programs and reforms are made based on these statistical numbers. And so if you take me, for example, June 5th will be my 9th year of not being home. So I guess like I would be considered a success. And so my point is this, that my reentry into society was completely different than everyone else's. So the film doesn't show that when I came home, my father was in prison, and he understood how he was in prison and he came home and he understood the challenges that I would face. So the whole 19 year, he passed before I got there. So the whole 18 and a half years, my father said, hey, if you're gonna be there for a while, they can't keep you forever because you weren't there for murder. You're gonna have to come home one day. And one of the biggest problems you're gonna face are financial problems. So instead of, like sending you money every week to spend at the commissary to buy stuff that you don't really need, I'm gonna save half of it. And so I came home with a certain amount of money. And then because he passed before I left, I came home to insurance money too. So when I came home to somewhere around $20,000 to get my start. And then also I came home to John Lucas, who is the director of the film, and Claudia Rankin, who worked at another college, who worked at a college in California, who told me about the college program. And they helped me move out there to get my start. So most people don't have the type of start they have. And then I had a camera follow me around, for the first few years. There's like, I can't get in trouble to keep me on the straight and narrow. But this is not the normal pathway to re-enter into society. So so every time we have these talks, I'm torn between telling the real and what the people want to hear, because a lot of our screenings are in community centers and prisons, and they need to hear hope, and there's hope out there, but it's not as I'm not the person to be used as the example. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm always torn between trying to tell them, okay, there's more of a challenge than there is, but I don't want to, douse their hopes.
Is it really your responsibility to give us hope?
No, and that's why I'm telling you all right now the real story, like what's really happening, because all of y'all are beyond.
How much opportunity is there in prison systems for continuing education? We hear that there really is not much opportunity. Is that so, or?
Yeah, that's true. There used to be a lot more before Bill Clinton did away with the federal Pell Grant for incarcerated students. New York used to have one of the most progressive educational systems inside a prison prior to then. They had a cohesive higher college program in prison where there was a head over it, and you could transfer, your credits followed you from different institutions, and there was this whole thing going on in New York. And in Ohio, something similar was going, but it was individualized. Each individual university would go into a particular group of institutions, and you could get a BA. When I first started college, I was pursuing a BA in criminal justice. There was 5 or 6 different programs that you can get an AA in or a BA in, but after federal Pell Grant, all that was done away, and there's very little college programming in the vast majority of the prisons in Ohio, in the United States.
Yeah.
And in addition to the good supports you mentioned that you received after coming out of prison, were you also undergoing a transition within prison in terms of how you looked at yourself and what you had done? And
Right. So I was raised Christian. My mother was initially my mother and father were in what we call the life. They lived the life, the fast life, and they were involved in criminality. And first my mother was confined, and then she came home and she had she had a religious experience, and she became a devout Christian and never went back to prison since. And then my father was incarcerated, and he did somewhere between 4 or 5 years on 2 different occasions. So when my father went away, I stayed with my mother, and she instilled, we went to church a lot and everything. So when I got arrested, it was like, come on, Richard, you know better than this. And then I began to, turn my life around based on the Christian faith. But inside prison, I was kind of not disheartened with how the church was ran when I was younger. In the church I went to, I felt it wasn't being ran right. So I began to search, okay, what's my calling, my own calling, and then I had my own religious conversion, and I started there. And 5 years prior to going home, I had this plan where I'm going to try to simulate being home while I'm inside. So I made sure, because in prison there's like work jobs that you can have, and I usually went to school for the most part, but I said no, I probably won't be able to go to school when I get out there, so I'm gonna try to find me a job where I'm at least working 5 to 6 hours a day. And I began to do those things that would simulate being home, so to prepare myself when I'm home. And
You cleaning the office buildings and all that?
no, that was Donovan.
Oh.
Donovan, he when he came on, he started subcontracting cleaning that he actually ended up selling to me when I came home. Yeah, so that was my first job. But I also so prison is a place where normal human emotions can be taken advantage of. So you have to detach yourself from certain emotions, and not just inside of prison, but those things that are happening outside of prison. People die outside of prison, and you have to be able to deal with that inside. I'm 18, looking at 20 years before. I have more years to go than I've been alive before I can come home. And psychologically, I got to process this. I have to find a way to deal with it. So being detached is one of the things that helped me deal with being in prison, because there are a lot of things that happened while I was there that I would have no control over, that I could not do anything to help with. So 5 years before I went home, I began to try to reattach myself to those normal emotions people have. And I think like that was one of my biggest challenges, like the psychological challenge of returning to society and re-embracing my own humanity. So I think that was the biggest transition that I'm still grappling with.
That transition that you're talking about, the religious experience and getting yourself psychologically together, did you do that on your own, or did you have help in prison?
Initially it was on my own, and then I had help in prison. They're inside prison, they have organized religious services for pretty much almost every religion. If you can establish that it's like, for lack of a better word, a real religion outside, where you have clergy and all that, and they can come in, then they'll allow you to practice it. Like you would find in certain prisons that, some of the indigenous population, where they would have teepees and they would be able to do their religious ceremonies there. So yes, we had outside people coming in, facilitating religious service for us.
Did you say you had kids?
Yeah, I have two.
And that happened after you?
Yes,
got out of
after,
prison?
like I was in the halfway house for 6 months, and my daughter was conceived like a month after I got into the halfway house. My oldest daughter, she'll be 8 in October.
And how do you feel about being a father
At such age,
Yeah.
at
Are you
30, I think I was 40 when my daughter was conceived. No, I'm not married. My child's mother and I didn't marry.
Are you together?
You can always say this is none of your business.
I just want to thank you, first of all, for being here and talking to us, and also for the film and for the work you're doing. You mentioned, this thing about, having to hold both, like your own story and the story of most of the people that come out of prison. And I wondered if you would talk a little bit about what we need to know about the people that come out of prison after having served for a long time, like you did and your friends, and who don't have the $20,000,
The support.
the support that you seem to have. And I'm very glad you had it.
Yeah. So in terms of like the model releasee instead of minority, I would be the model minority in terms of people being released. The majority of people coming home, usually come home with, some states give them money for bus to go home, or I forget what it's called. It's like institution pay. They keep the money they have that they had throughout the years, but I got a bus ticket and $75 and whatever I had there, and the support I had from family members when I got out. And that's what most people would have, somewhere around $100, a bus ticket, and either placement in a shelter or a halfway house. And if they're fortunate enough to have family support, they could go home to their families. And the vast majority of their families come from the neighborhoods they come from. And so, and part of the stuff that I wrote had a lot to do with, you know, structural inequalities and trying to move away from individual focused reforms, because most of the reforms we have today that are being pushed through the government, like the First Chance Act, the First Step Act that Trump pushed through, is centered around changing behaviors of individuals instead of those structural inequalities and those things in the system that create the environments in which these people are making these decisions in that lead them to prison. So we have a lot of individual focused reforms going on that, like I said, a lot of them are going home to the same neighborhoods that they came from that are poverty ridden, and a lot of structural violence going on in there, and they have to still deal with that. So until we begin to address those issues in society that create these inequalities, until we begin to pay people a living wage and have access to higher education and health care, and that education be a culturally sensitive education where people see themselves in that educational system that makes them want to stay engaged instead of disengaged, then we will send people in society to the same place that they came to the same place that they came from, just at a different age, and maybe with a little bit of education that they received inside of prison. So I think we need to begin to address structural issues that get to the root cause of why we are spending $182 billion annually on confining people. And this is between the prison system, the criminal legal system, and post-prison. We spend $182 billion to make sure people stay locked up.
Is it still true that in New York City that if you have come out and convicted of a crime, you cannot live in public housing?
I'm not.
That was so.
I believe so, and even if your family is there, you can't live there. I think you might not even be able to visit NYCHA housing.
Yes, it depends.
Yeah. They're working at it, trying to address that as we speak, but yeah, that's.
But that would be one of the, like a major hardship, but you
Right.
grew up in public housing, you commit a crime, you come out and you can't live with your family.
Even letting them back into public housing is still problematic. Public housing in and of itself is
They
problematic.
won't let you.
So until we
live
address the
there.
issue, yeah, even if they could, until we address the issues that create public housing and make it necessary for people to live in subsidized housing, you're still going to have the problem. Because the problem isn't the person, is the fact that they have to live in subsidized housing. They're not paid a living wage where they can afford, I guess we would call it normal housing. Be able to pay normal housing, rent, or mortgage to own. Like a lot of people, especially black and brown people and poor people, they don't have an ownership stake in this country, whether it be financially or politically. So even if you did allow them to come back into public housing, it's still putting them in the same situation that they were in before, because they're locked out from the labor force.
What do you make if you're working in prison? What are you paid?
Anywhere from 6 cents to 50 cents a day.
A day?
A day.
Oh my God.
But contrary to beliefs, there's not a significant amount of I guess you would call it slave labor going on in prison. That's a misnomer.
Well, but if you're working for 80 cents a day, what would you
called.
So, so a lot of in certain states they give them what they call state pay, and you do stuff just, I guess it's just to keep you occupied. Like the housing area that they live in needs to be cleaned and kept clean, and so your job would be a porter. So my job in prison, while I was there, mainly I wasn't trying to do much cleaning, or you would cook the food. So I was always a tutor in the educational department, so I would get paid to be a tutor. So there are jobs that they make up, yeah.
Decently, or?
No, I would get paid. My pay was $24 a month. I got $24 a month to be
So you weren't
a
paying
tutor.
decent.
You're right. And so the people who kept the dorms clean, or the living quarters clean, they made $17 a month. The people who cooked the food, they made $17 a month. And there were certain prisons that had, like, in Ohio, it's called Ohio Industries, where they made parts for different companies out there. That's there, but it's not real big. It's not to the point where we have to worry about prison labor taking over labor in society. That's politicians trying to get elected using this platform as, you know, a vehicle for doing so. So they do have companies that come in and they produce parts for different companies, but and they make anywhere from $2 to $3 an hour, if that, maybe less. Yeah, $1 an hour, somewhere around there.
Over the course of your incarceration, you would see people that would be about the age you were when you entered.
Mhm.
And did you observe any a change in the type of crime that they were convicted or pled guilty for? Did it move more into drug-related, drug dealing, drug selling? Was there, because you haven't spoken at all, because that was what you were.
Right.
Could you
Which
repeat
was
the
it?
question?
Which was
She wanted to know.
the relationship between the younger people that are now incarcerated and drugs.
Yeah, so from the time I went in until around the time I left, had the types of crime that younger people came in for changed, and and you specifically in terms of drugs. There's like a code in prison that you don't ask a person what they're in there for, so I don't know what a lot of people were in there for. But statistically, drug offenses make up a small portion of the criminal justice system. If we released all the nonviolent drug offenders, we won't make a dent in the 2.3 million people that are incarcerated. Yeah, so.
It's not in New York.
Huh?
It's not in New York, where they had a mandatory 25-year
Right.
prison sentence.
Right, the Rockefeller laws. Well, those were adopted throughout the country, like New York and California, because they're so densely populated. A lot of the policies that happen there usually spread throughout the country. They both had similar effects on policies throughout the country. So, yeah, the number of people who are incarcerated, especially at the federal level for drugs, isn't. Yeah, it won't do much. So a lot of this is what I mean by, like, part of my talk was going to be about how recidivism and how we define what recidivism is, and how we utilize the model minority, people such as myself who have obtained a certain amount of success or a certain amount of reintegration, and how their stories and these statistics are used to push policies that aren't really addressing the real issues. Yes, they're not addressing the real issues that's causing crime or causing people to reoffend. So, and one of the main things that they pushing is that the war on drugs was a main catalyst for the mass incarceration and high rates of incarceration. The majority of people are in a large percentage of the people who are inside for offenses of violence, and contrary to popular belief, that people who are released with offenses of violence are the least likely to reoffend. They have the lowest recidivism rate, and no matter how you measure recidivism, whether you measure it by being rearrested, reconvicted, or when you survey people about what they have done, no matter how you look at it, people who were are convicted for offenses of violence have the lowest recidivism rate, whereas in politics and in mainstream society, you hear the opposite, that they are the problem and things of this nature. So, yes.
What were some of the main points of your journey between the halfway house to you standing here tonight?
Oh, okay. I would say the reason I went to school is because I had a daughter, and I wanted to be able to provide her a better quality of life. And most people will die in the social economic class that they were born in. And one of the fastest way to move up the social ladder is through education. So I had a plan when I first came home that I was going to come home and be an entrepreneur. And I learned a lot of stuff about the stock market and investing. And I was going to start this investing group with my family. And, you know, it would take some time. And that's part of the reason why I bought the cleaning contracting company from Donavon. And this was going to be like the part, and I was going to hire my family, we were going to work in it. But I ended up having a daughter. And so this was like one of the major turning points in my life where, okay, I have a child being born, I have a child on the way, and I need to provide a better quality of life for herself and my mother, who stood by my side the whole 15 years that I was there. When I came home in the halfway house and I got a job that was like probably about 35, 40 minutes away from where I was being, where I resided at in the halfway house, and I needed to be at work at 6 o'clock. She would come every morning, pick me up, and make sure I got to work at 6 o'clock. So I wanted to provide a better quality of life for her and my daughter. And that changed me, and I went to college and graduating from college. And the film, like I said, the film was also part of the journey. It followed me around, and then once the film was done, it was being screened at different places. We originally screened, the first screening happened in Ohio at the Cleveland International Film Festival. We screened here at the Harlem International Film Festival. And then I can't remember exactly how it got in the hands of the Justice and Education. Was it Justice and Education Institute at the time? No, it was the Humanities.
The Heyman Center?
Yeah, at the Heyman Center, but I'm trying to think of the initiative that brought the film to Columbia. So anyways, the film was brought to Columbia, and while we were there, they had this like roundtable discussion with the director of the Heyman Center, Eileen Gululi, I forget, some people from the Center for Justice, and they wanted to know, did we have any ideas how could they leverage the Columbia brand to bring more awareness about mass incarceration and activism around it? And you know, and in that conversation, they asked me what was my plans for the future, and one of them was to attend graduate school. And they asked me, did I, you know, I forget who asked me, was I planning on coming to Columbia? Did I plan to apply to Columbia? And at the time I was in sunny California, and they was like, and so I made a joke about it. I'm like, man, I'm allergic to snow, so I can't come here. But then I spoke with Kathy Bodine, who's co-director of the Center for Justice, and a few other professors who were working on social justice issues, and they were telling me about the Justice and Education Initiative and all the work that they were doing, and I was like, wow, this is it's not so much my forte. I'm a little more radical. You hear me talking about structural changes and stuff like that, but you have to meet people where they are. You help people and you fight systems, so they were helping people more so than fighting system, and that still needed to be done. So I'm like, okay, yeah, I can help people too. I'm a people person, so I decided, okay, well, I would apply here when I do decide to go. And so I forget how, I don't know what happened behind the scenes, but they got some money, and Eileen said, hey, would you like to come and help us here? I was like, does the job have benefits? And I'm like, I got a daughter. She said, yes, it's a real job, complete with benefits, full time. And I'm like, I'm on my way. So those are the points that were life-changing for me from the time I got out to where I'm here talking to y'all now.
How did you get selected to be focused on and filmed and?
Oh, how did the film come about? Oh, okay. So John Lucas, who's the director of the film, was the mentor to my cousin Charles. in a Big Brother Little Brothers program in Ohio. And John is a photographer by trade, and he used to go around taking pictures of my cousin and making these big black and white pictures of them when they on their outings. And a lot of the young people in my neighborhood liked the pictures, and every time he'd come around, they called him the picture man. Picture man, take my picture, take my picture. So John had this idea of, okay, he wanted to show, I'm assuming that like he wanted to show the marginalization of inner city youth. So he said, okay, I'll take your picture. And the main, for whatever reason, the picture that they wanted to be taken is he took this picture of my cousin with the flag as the backdrop, and it's a black and white picture. And everybody wanted their picture taken in front of the flag. So John said, I'll take your picture in front of the flag if you write me an essay about what that flag means to you. So they said, okay. And I think he did about 20 people from my neighborhood, and they wrote an essay about what the flag meant to him, and he would transpose it behind the picture onto the picture. So you could read the essay and see the picture at the same time. And he, you know, he did exhibits around the country with the pictures, the flag series. And it's like a book that made a book and everything. And so my brother, three of my cousins are in the flag series. Donavon is in the flag series, and his brother, Charlie's little brother, is in the flag series. Like all our friends are in the series. I didn't get in it because, and I'm just being brutally honest at the time, coming from where I come from, I didn't trust John. You know, I didn't trust John.
Was he white?
Yeah, John is white. Yes. So I didn't trust John. I'm like, John. And plus I was already running the streets and doing a whole bunch of other stuff that I didn't have time for. So I said, man, I don't have time for this. But anyways, 15 years later, he wanted to revisit the flag series and see what was going on with the people who participated in it. And some of them were in the institution where I was in. And so when he came to interview them about it, instead of doing Steel series, he was going to do a documentary about them. And so when he came to visit to interview them for the Steel series, Charlie and I were in the same institution with some of the people. So it was like, hey, you know, and he had kept in touch over the years with us. You know, we write and call, and he would send me books. I remember the first book he sent me was this book by, I can't even think of the author, but it was Black Economics. And like a lot of the Afrocentric books I received were coming from John. I'm like, what's up with John? So we stayed friends over the years. And so John and I are friends, like real friends. He knows me. So anyways, which made it a whole lot easier to do the film. So when he interviewed some of the people, he came and interviewed Charlie and I, and he was like, this is the story I want to tell. So that's how, because he's attached to the story. He knows this, and like he always say, I knew him before they were Cooler Bandits. I knew him when they were children, just, you know, teenagers running around in the neighborhood. So that's how, I guess I wasn't chosen, the story chose us. Yeah. Yeah.
So what are the next steps for you?
For me, I still haven't applied to graduate school because I have 2 children now, and I'm back and forth, and it's like I have to make a decision about where I want to settle myself. So once I decide where I want to settle myself, then I'll decide on my education after that, but it's still on the table.
Are you satisfied with your daughter's education?
With my daughter's education, yeah. So she's attending a school out in the suburbs of Youngstown, and it's a really good school. I'm satisfied in the sense of where she is, but as far as like the content and the curriculum, I still feel there should be more in the content and the curriculum that reflects her culture and who she is as a black young woman. As a child, rather, as a black child. Yeah, I'm pretty sure the educational curriculum hasn't changed since. They're still teaching Columbus discovered America. Yeah. So, yeah, so I won't say I'm satisfied, but as far as the education that we have, she's in one of the better school systems.
Well, how can we thank you?
Inviting me.